Evening, members, or afternoon, I should say. Get a bit ahead. Welcome to our full licensing meeting. To start with, I must read the webcasting announcement. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of subsequent repeated viewing, and with copies of the recording be made available for those that require it. By being present at this meeting, it's likely that the recording cameras will capture your image and will result in your image becoming part of the broadcast. You should also be aware that it may infringe your human and data protection rights. If you have any concerns, then please see to the webcasting officer, that's Steve up the end there, and please got to remind all members to activate their microphones before speaking. So first of all, we start off with apologies for absence.
Yes, Councillor. Just apologies from Councillor Hadley.
Are there any other apologies? No? Before we go on to, first of all, other declarations of interest? No? Right, any other business? We haven't done, but before we start the meeting, I would like to introduce, most of you know Sally Devine, our Service Director, I think you call yourself, don't you, Sally? Oh, all right. Well, I'm pleased to welcome David King, who is our new licensing manager. He's taken over from Kim Tuckey, who has left us. Do you want to say a bit about yourself, David?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And hello, councillors, good afternoon. So my name's David King. I've joined you as a new Kim, the team manager for licensing. I've joined you from your neighbouring borough, Waltham Forest, where I worked for 25 years. Just before leaving Waltham Forest, I was service manager, managing licensing, environmental health, trading standards and street trading. In terms of my experience, I joined Waltham Forest in '96 before joining trading standards in 1998. I then moved on to licensing, and I've worked in licensing for over 20 years. So I've had the benefit of working in a very exciting environment for the last 25 years and worked on a number of large events and stuff, not to mention the Olympics. I was part of the Olympics Delivery Committee. But I'm pleased now to join you at Epping, and I hope to bring some experience and enjoy my time here. Thank you, Chair.
That is on silent.
German, isn't it?
It will be on silent in a minute. It was on silent, but... Right.
I must put mine on silent.
Yeah. I apologise, members, for that. One thing I will say, that you must remember when you're in the council, turn your phone off, and that was on silent, but that didn't work. Okay, right. Is there any other business?
No other business yet.
Right, thank you. Minutes of the last meeting, which is on the 30th of November, on pages 5 to 10. Any comments on that? Right, I can sign those as a correct record. Item 7, the licensing statistics on page 11 to 12. There we are. Anybody want? David, if you'd like to.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So under the Licensing Act 2003 and the Gambling Act 2005, officers are required to report the number of applications received and the determinations of those applications. The statistical report below details the applications received between the 1st of October 2020 and the 30th of September 2021. For information and comparison, the figures have been provided for the previous 12 months also. There's not much else to report here, Chair, other than the committee will note in particular in relation to the number of new applications, the number of renewals, the change of designated premises supervisor and the number of applications considered by the licensing committee. We've seen a particularly high increase across the board, which is to be suspected, obviously, because the previous period was during COVID, at the height of COVID, so we wouldn't have received so many applications. But it's good to see that these are kind of what we would consider, obviously, certainly a step in the right direction to economic recovery as far as the high street and hospitality trade is going. Any questions, Chair?
Okay, are there any questions, members? So we can note, Councillor Sarti, sorry.
Okay. Sorry, it's not directly relating to this. I know it doesn't come under the legislation, but I just wondered if it's possible at some point to get an indication of how many taxi driver licence applications we're getting in at this point. Yeah, it's one of those ones we've got no real envisaging of the numbers at all.
Yes, Chair, we can certainly do that. It's been a difficult period, obviously, in terms of taxi drivers. We know that, obviously, a lot of the taxi drivers will have surrendered their licences and probably won't return to us. But we're starting to, obviously, see an increase in applications again. So, potentially, the next quarter, we'll be able to provide you with a comparison.
I mean, just to add to that, one of the things that we have to do as part of the COVID return is indicate licensing loss as a result of COVID since April 19. And just sort of looking at those figures, which will cover taxi licensing and the all licensing act as well. It is catching up. So we had a loss initially of 13 grand compared to the same. Now it's sort of getting to be sort of 4,000 or 5,000. So per month comparison to the equivalent 2019 figures. So we're definitely back on sort of heading in the right direction. I think that will be reflected as well in the taxi licensing.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lyon.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, very interesting figures. So I agree with Councillor Sarti, and we do need to look very carefully at what's going on with the taxi trade. I'll raise it perhaps later on, but would be interested in the number of electric vehicles that are registered in Epping Forest. Can we find that out? And also what the sort of propensity is to look at electric charging points for taxis.
Yeah, we do know, but I can't tell you off the top of my head now, but we do have the data which we fed into Stephen Lloyd-Jones, who's the Sustainable Transport Officer. Should we talk about that now, or do you want to? Well, maybe we'll come after. Yeah, the Sustainable Transport Officer who's been looking into electric vehicles for taxis. So we'll talk as an added item at the end of this, I think.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, I think that's important because we did have a very interesting presentation last evening at Overview and Scrutiny on the whole of sustainable economy, which included charging points and electric taxis. So I would welcome Sally's input at the end on that one. That would be really helpful.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions on the statistics? Okay, if not, we'll note the results of those statistics on page 11. Okay. Moving on to item 8, direct resident consultation within 150 metres of the application on pages 13 to 18. Again, David King, please.
Thank you, Chair. The Licensing Committee have previously requested a report detailing the cost and the implications of the Council's current process of writing to all residents within a 150 metre radius to notify them of applications for the grant of a variation of a premises licence or club premise certificate. This is a process that has been adopted by the Council and is over and above the legal requirements placed on the Council in respect of the advertising of applications. The Licensing Act 2003 places a legal obligation on applicants for the grant or variation of a premises licence or club premise certificate to advertise the application in a prescribed manner. This includes prominently displaying a notice at the premises to which the application relates for a minimum period of 28 consecutive days, the publishing of a notice in the local newspaper on at least one occasion during a period of 10 working days, starting on the day after the day on which the application was given to the licensing authority. The notice must provide the following information: the name of the applicant or club, the postal address of the premises, the relevant licensable activities that is proposed to be carried on from the premises, the postal address, and where applicable, the web address where the register of the relevant licensing authority is kept and where the record of the application may be inspected, the date by which an interested party or responsible authority may make written representations, and also must carry the statement that it is an offence to knowingly or recklessly make a false statement in connection with the application. It's also a requirement that the local authority publish a register on its website detailing applications received. In addition, it is also a legal requirement that the following responsible authorities are consulted directly: the licensing authority itself, Essex Police, Essex Fire and Rescue, the body responsible for enforcing health and safety at work, planning, public health, environmental health and neighbourhoods team, County Council Child Protection Team, Trading Standards, County Council Public Health and the Home Office Immigration. In addition to the statutory consultation above, the Council also directly consults with residents within a 150 metre radius. It also consults with ward councillors, town parish councils, and the details are also included in the members' bulletin. Whilst it is permissible for the Council to undertake consultation over and above that set out in the regulations, there is no legal obligation for it to do so. We are currently undertaking benchmarking exercise with neighbouring authorities, and whilst we are still waiting for a number of responses, the early indication is that the majority, if not all, do not undertake additional consultation with residents. Full details of the outcome of the consultation will follow in due course once it's been complete. The Licensing Act 2003 provides for fees to be payable to the licensing authority in respect of the discharge of their functions. The fees are set by central government at a level to allow the full cost recovery for the administration, inspection and enforcement of the regime. The fee payable for the grant or variation of a premises licence or club premise certificate is determined by the non-domestic rateable value of the premises. The fee bands vary from £100 under Band A, rising to £635 at the higher end of Band E. These are statutory fees, and the Act does not allow for local authorities to charge applicants for any additional cost incurred in the application process. Of the 28 applications sampled, the majority of the premises fall within Band B and C. Therefore, the cost applied would be set at £190 for the premises falling within Band B, or £350 for those in Band C. The cost analysis undertaken shows us that from the 28 applications sampled, the total income received from the application fees was £6,760. However, the printing and postage costs associated with writing to residents within a 150 metre radius cost £12,397. This is an additional cost to the council and over and above the income received of £5,637. The sampling showed that the costs associated with processing 24 of the 28 applications received exceeded the application fee. Therefore, 86% of applications received are costing the council more to process than we receive in income. It should be noted, however, that the true cost of the council will be much higher than the £5,637 figure quoted, as this figure does not include officer time processing applications or the cost of the council in holding licensing committee hearings. This is solely the cost for printing and postage associated with consulting with residents within a 150 metre radius. Analysis also shows that 48% of applications received attracted representations and required determination by the licensing subcommittee. This figure will in part be attributed to the additional consultation currently being undertaken. The committee should note, however, that the above information is based on the current printing arrangements with an outside contractor following the outsourcing of the council's reprographic service. Following a recent tender and procurement process, the council has now contracted a new printing solution, PSL, that is more competitively priced and includes a print-to-post solution that can be used for licensing consultations. It is estimated, with the new provider, printing costs can be reduced by at least 70%. However, this reduction does not take into consideration the additional officer time in preparing the mail merge process for printing, which may take several hours per consult, depending on the location of the premises and the number of properties within the 150 metre radius. Therefore, the true overall saving will be far less than the 70% figure just stated. The consultation also carries with it a number of implications and risks. And whilst the current process undoubtedly brings some benefits in terms of increased community engagement and greater awareness of applications, it also presents additional reputational and financial risk to the Council. Where the Council has adopted consultation over and above what is legally required, in doing so, it has created a reasonable assumption that all residents within a 150 metre radius will be directly advised in writing. Should the Council inadvertently fail to contact some residents in accordance with this policy, it may be at risk of legal challenge or judicial review. In the report, I've highlighted some case law where this was the case. In summary, Westminster Council had adopted a policy whereby they send written notification letters to residents within a 100 metre circle around the premises to which the application relates. In this instance, the Council software did not capture some of the residents in the 100 metre radius of the Royal Albert Hall. And as a result, some residents were not notified. Once the residents realised that an application had been submitted, they made a written representation opposing the application. However, as the statutory consultation period had ended, the representations were rejected by Westminster Council and the licence was subsequently granted. The decision was challenged by the residents by way of appeal in the High Court. But in determining the appeal, the courts held that Westminster's decision to refuse to consider late representations was lawful, but its decision to grant the variation was unlawful because it had failed to fulfil the legal expectation of the residents that would send them notification of the application. The courts determined that neither the Licensing Act 2003 nor the regulations imposed any duty on the licensing authority to advertise an application or to take any steps to notify anyone affected by it that it had been made. The sole duty to advertise and give notice of the application was placed on the person making the application, i.e. the applicant. Whilst this decision was subsequently overturned by High Court of Appeal, in doing so, Lord Justice Burnton stated, "This did not mean that the decision by an authority to refrain from notifying persons affected by the licensing application could not be challenged. In theory, if it was thought that the authority was acting irrationally or otherwise unlawfully, an order could be sought requiring it to consider its decision, and if made sufficiently promptly, the court might grant relief, if it would have any practical value."
It's just a little bit, David.
So, do we need to have all this detail? We've read the report.
Actually, I was going to say, Kathleen, David, we mainly just want the main points, because all the members have got the agenda and probably read it. We just need the main points of what's happening.
The summary, yes, summary chart.
Summarise.
That's
not being rude about it.
no, that's
Just summarise the reports, any reports, really.
yeah, that's just fine, Chair. Sorry, my apologies, Chair and councillors. I wasn't too sure whether you'd want the whole report in detail. I realise this is quite obviously an important subject. What I'll do then, Chair, with your permission, I will fast forward to my summary and recommendations.
That's it, yes.
Is that okay? In summary, neither the Licensing Act 2003 or the associated regulations impose any duty on the licensing authority to advertise an application or to take any additional steps to notify anyone that may be potentially affected by an application. If government felt it was necessary, it would have made additional consultation a statutory requirement. Instead, it places the sole duty to advertise and give notice of the application on the person making the application. This view is shared by the majority of local authorities who do not undertake consultation over and above that legally required. Whilst it is permissible for the Council to undertake additional consultation with residents within a 150 metre radius, in doing so it implies that a facility rule applies and carries an unnecessary risk in terms of legal challenge. It also brings an avoidable additional financial burden to both the Council and business. The Act provides for fees payable to the licensing authority in respect of the discharge of their functions. The purpose of the fee is to allow the full cost recovery for the administration, inspection and enforcement of the regime. The the cost incurred for the additional 150 metre consultation currently far exceeds the revenue generated through the application process. Even with the new printing solution in place and the reduced costs that will bring, the cost is still likely to exceed the revenue generated due to the administrative burden on preparing the mail merge. This is not sustainable. The Council already exceeds the statutory requirements by consulting directly with all councillors, town councils, town and parish councils and residents' associations. I would suggest that the town and parish councils, on receipt of an application, could themselves consider if wider consultation for its own methods is warranted and discuss the applications with residents should they wish. This would maintain a high level of community engagement whilst avoiding the unnecessary financial and administrative burden on the Council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Amendments. Councillor Pond.
I was on the Task and Finish panel, which looked at this and recommended it. Richard was also on the panel, and it was chaired by Penny Smith. And it recommended it. It had to go to ONS, of course, who I assume agreed it. But my view is not any different than it was before, and I think the letters must continue. Who reads local newspapers anymore? Often the notices that they're supposed to put on the premises where they could be seen from the exteriors of the premises often can't be seen. And I feel that, unfortunately, the report gives the impression that representations are just extra work. I didn't think the costs were particularly expensive. I think the public would think this is undemocratic to stop issuing the letters. How would we explain it? Could we suddenly stop it and they wouldn't notice? Licensing is very controversial. The 2003 Act skewed it in the applicant's favour, as we all know, but residents do need to know. So it's just a comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lyon.
Thank you, Chairman. I think there is a sort of a consideration that cost is the most important thing, and I'm not sure it is. It's really about consultation with residents and getting their opinion. There's also some confusion with licensing and planning, and people get very confused, so I think there needs to be some clarity there. The other thought is we've got, from the statistics, 35 applications and 386 renewals. What sort of response in terms of consultation have we had for those applications? So how many letters went out for each of those and how many responses did we get? So at least we've got some baseline to understand how important and how residents are reacting to the information that they're getting. I know that licensing is very controversial and it is confusing because people don't necessarily understand the difference between the licensing objectives and the planning objectives. So I think there's some input there, and I think what Caroline, what Councillor Pond said is absolutely vital. You know, there was a reason for doing this, and I think it's in our interest to continue, and I think the cost is something that we need to consider, but not overriding consideration. Thank you.
Sally.
Come in if you want to.
Yeah.
I haven't got the figures in front of me, but I know that, for example, Club 195, I think we did a consult for over 300 letters, and I think we had one representation. That's quite a recent one. I also know that the Loughton area, generally, we will get objections to 90%, 99%, 95% of applications. So almost all of those will go to a hearing. The other points that you raised, planning, I don't believe they do 150 metre consult or any additional consultation above the statutory requirements. Just a comment. And the other thing is that absolutely the cost implications are one element of it, but as the council as a whole, we have considerable savings that we need to make, and we will be scrutinised where we could make savings and we don't. I'm not saying that's a reason again, it's just a comment. And my other comment, just while I've got the mic, is that it does go against our climate agenda. Sending out 350 letters for just one consultation smacks in the face of our climate agenda to go paperless and to meet our net figures by 2030. Thanks. Do you want?
Yeah, just coming on that, if I may, Chair. In terms of the representations received for each application, we haven't got those figures, but Sally mentions, looking at the 28 applications sampled, the number of letters sent out range from 60 in one case to about 340 at the highest end in terms of that. What's also interesting to note is in the committee where we sampled 28 applications, and I gave you a figure of 48% went to committee. If I can take you back to the previous report in terms of the stats, if we look at the number of new applications received for that period, in the 12-month period, there's 35 applications received, and the number of applications considered by the committee was 28. That's actually an 86% of applications received actually come before the licensing committee, which seems particularly high in my view. Again, just to echo what Sally said, not just about cost, it's also about what the Act intended as well, and the fact that we do as a council leave ourselves open to risk and challenge if we fail in our duty, our undertaking to consult with residents within that 150 metre radius. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Williamson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a great advocate for public consultation in all matters, really. But my one concern was in paragraph 7, where the risk of legal channel or judicial review, and you mentioned the 2011 Westminster case. Presumably we have not had any legal challenges or judicial reviews in Epping Forest. Whether the 2011 opens the door to these challenges from various people, I don't know. That's my only concern in this. In planning, I know other authorities do not send any letters out at all. So it's one of those balance things, isn't it? I'm not too concerned about the cost. I understand your point about saving money. It's a balance of risk, and I see little risk actually involved in this decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Whitehouse, John Whitehouse.
Thanks, Chairman. There's a lot of interesting information in here, but I don't think it's consistent to argue on the one hand that it's not worth doing because we send out lots of letters and don't get responses, and on the other hand we get lots of responses when we send out representations, and therefore we shouldn't do it because it leads to lots of hearings. They can't both be correct, I'd have thought. And there's a slight flavour in here that the council would be a lot easier to run if it wasn't for members of the public. It does rather overlook the fact that the purpose of the council is to serve members of the public. And I think in particular, what you get with a lot of hearings is you get changes to conditions which mean that the potential nuisance or annoyance caused by licensing is mitigated. And although the licence is granted, it's granted in a way that's more appropriate for the area. And in that case, it's a win for the applicant and it's a win for the residents in a way that isn't sort of necessarily the case if stuff goes through on the nod and problems occur later on. I mean, looking at the particular sort of justifications which are there, the legal justifications, the focus of the report is on the High Court judgment, but then at the end it sort of slips in that judgment was overturned. It's really the Court of Appeal judgment which is the key judgment here, it seems. And, you know, the way to mitigate the risk for that is to make sure that, you know, we do have proper processes in place and we don't behave irrationally or negligently. And that's quite a high threshold. And, you know, I think it's something that shouldn't worry us unduly. And as we've heard, even with the very controversial applications that we have had to deal with, we've generally avoided even appeals to magistrates' courts, let alone to you know, judicial reviews and high courts. On the money, I mean, those figures, as we've heard, are out of date. I mean, clearly that is a consideration. I mean, personally, I'd be happy to forego a logo on the hub downstairs. It meant we could have a few more years of sending out letters to residents. So, you know, potentially there are other areas in the council's work that those savings could be found. And I'd be happy to look at the detail of the radius. I mean, there may be methods with postcodes, there may be methods with you know, using streets or grid squares or something if calculating 150 radius is a complicated bit. But, you know, if you've got digital mapping software linked to a property database, it shouldn't be an overly onerous job to do. Okay, right. And actually doing a mail merge is one of the most basic of these tasks, so it surprises me that it takes hours unless we're hand enveloping the bits.
The actual software for doing the meter, the radius, is reasonably straightforward. We can do that. But to actually create, from going from mail merge to the letters out, or creating the mail merge, is time consuming, even with this new organisation that we're going to be joining with. It does take time. It can take several hours for one officer to do that consult. I just wondered, I know people like to get letters, but bearing in mind, you know, the whole idea about paper, etc., would residents look at doing something with MailChimp or something like that, where they positively say they want to receive some or consults, and then they can be notified of when a consult is available electronically, and then they go on actively to the website where they can see it. That's, you know, that's something that we introduced, for example, for landlord engagement when I was doing private sector housing. So that gets away from paper. It gives the opportunity for residents to positively say that they are interested in receiving any consults, for example, that might come, and then they're notified via MailChimp of that when there is something, and then they go straight onto the website and they get all the information.
Okay, just sort of finish. Yeah, I mean, I accept. Yeah, clearly there is a time issue involved in preparing this stuff, and I'm happy, you know, that we look at ways of improving the consultation, but I don't think we should just remove it. And I think the arguments about vicinity and so forth, I mean, you could equally argue we shouldn't put it on the website because of the people who are digitally excluded. You know, I think, you know, that's an argument that could be overemphasised. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Kesker.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to prove I not only received the agenda notes, I read them from start to finish. I've got a number of comments here, and I'll go through them all together. I agree with Councillor Whitehouse's point about the Court of Appeal judgment. I cannot see us acting irrationally or otherwise unlawfully. We have legal officers to ensure that we can't do that. Can I just say, with regard to responses, quite often a number of people, other residents, will go to their ward councillor. They may not respond directly, but the ward councillor will be expected to come here and to speak very often to a licensing meeting on behalf of their residents. There are some wonderful computer-based systems. What about older residents who don't have a computer? What happens to them? Then the notice. We put out an A4 notice at the present time, and I have to say, I think quite often with the amount of wording on it, it's not big enough. An A2 would be much better. or an A3. An A3 would be better because it would be far more easily read and people would understand it better. There was a question of costs. I appreciate that, but the cost of running a number of our services is based on the fact that we get income from business rates. I know we give a lot to the government, but we do keep some, and that is supposed to pay for our services. It is possible to argue perhaps 150 metres is too much and 100 metres would be acceptable, but that's something for the council to decide as a whole. And lastly, it does seem to me that at the bottom of page 17 we're suggesting offloading the responsibility to town and parish councils, who may be even less adapted to deal with it than we are. It's a nice thought, but I'm not sure it's going to work. Those are my comments. Thank you, Chairman.
Right, thank you very much.
Come back on a couple of those points. The A4 notice, that's prescribed in law, and the font of the notice is that's all prescribed in law. So that's what the applicant legally has to do. We can't change that. In terms of the business rates, you're right. The council does get business rates, but the licensing service doesn't. And the licensing service needs to be self-financing going forward. Would be my argument to that. The comment about the town and parish councillors wasn't intended any other way than to suggest we should be looking at more creative ways to engage with residents, not necessarily by using the postal method, which, as detailed in the report, is costly and time-consuming. But it's about learning at smarter ways that we can consult with and engage with residents. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Sartin. Oh, sorry, Councillor.
Sorry, just to say, I appreciate the point about the legal size of font and all the rest of it on the signs, and that's a minimum. But the law also says we needn't tell the people within 150 metres at all. But we decide to do something better than that. That's considered to be a minimum, and we've gone for a better standard than that. I'm not sure it would stop us putting a bigger sign up. You may have to put two signs up, one on top of the other. I'm not sure that we would stand eagerly there, but it's just my experience of things going outside is that something in A3 is a lot more easily read and noticed than A4 on some of these premises.
Just to come back on that point, Jake, I completely agree with you. A3 would be better, but the legal requirement is the onus is actually on the applicant, and the legislation states that the applicant must place an A4 standard notice on the power blue backing size 10 font at the premises. But no, I agree. And the consultation that we do is we go over and above. That's not something we're pushing onto the applicant. That's something we choose to do as a council. So it's slightly different. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Sartin.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, one or two points. Can I just pick up, first of all, though, on the comment just made about having to be self-financing? Is the department self-financing at the moment? Are you losing money because of the 86% of applications that have exceeded the fee? Can I just ask that one first?
Well, the fees, Chair, the fees are meant to be set on a cost recovery basis. So the application fee that we get should cover the cost of us processing that particular application. And the purpose of the report is it highlights that it's not. So it's costed us more money. So then that means that as a service, then that money's being found elsewhere, or it's being funded elsewhere from other areas of the council. Cross-licensing, the golden rule is where we're able to set fees, it has to be set on a cost recovery basis. So in theory, if we're generating additional income from taxi licensing, we shouldn't be taking that money to be subsidising a different licensing regime. In terms of the service as a whole, I know it's been a difficult couple of years, and forgive me, Chair, but it's been relatively new. I think we're okay financially.
If we take COVID out of it, that which is obviously very different circumstances, we do recover our costs across the licensing function. Definitely we do. But if you break it down, when it comes to this part, we lose money, and that's what's evidenced in David's report. And if we didn't do the consult, then we wouldn't.
Councillor Sartin.
Thank you for that. one of the problems on this is that once you put something in place, it's a lot more difficult to take it away. And I think that's the dilemma that we have got at the moment. The cost implications, I think you've kind of covered that, and you're saying that it's not going to have an impact on the council's overall budgeting, because obviously having sat in Cabinet on Monday evening and heard the figures that are being put forward for the coming year, there are concerns about balancing the budget. So obviously wherever possible, we need to claw money, or to save money wherever possible along the way. A compromise, is it something where, like planning, it could be more a case of just notifying immediate neighbours or making a judgment call on where a particular venue sits, rather than this blanket 150-metre coverage? Well, it was just a question on one of your earlier comments about residents signing up to getting mail shots. I just wondered how you would notify members, residents in the first instance, that is the way forward. But again, as has been said, we do make the assumption too often that all residents have access to internet, and that just isn't the case. And we have to take account of that as well. But so, thank you for those. Letting me make those comments. If you have anything you want to come back on.
Yeah, I understand absolutely all the comments that you made. With respect to the compromise, I mean, that's for the committee to decide the numbers, because there is no statutory obligation to do anything. As in, if we have our recommendation would be not to consult for the reasons that we've outlined, the risk, potentially, although, we haven't been challenged, it doesn't mean that we won't in the future. The issue, or the costings, the climate agenda, etc. And I've probably forgotten something else. But the risk that we do have, if you set it at 150, that's an arbitrary number. I don't know how you came up with that. How it was decided with 150. There would have been valid reasons at the time. Why not 100? Why not 50? So where are you going to draw that line? What do you mean by immediate neighbours? And then you're always going to run that risk of upsetting the neighbour next door that isn't included. There's always, you run that risk, whatever it is that you do.
I think you run that risk anyway on the 150 metre, because there's people who are just going to, so whatever you do, you're going to be running a risk. Have you looked at what the planning department do and how they do actually set that? I mean, I get the impression that it is around immediate neighbours, and in certain applications, depending on what the application is, they might go out slightly wider.
I don't know, but that's a good point. We can go back and ask them what their criteria are. Do you know, David?
I don't, Chair. I mean, there's a couple of points I'd like to come back on. I think that's interesting. We can go away and certainly ask about planning. I think it's slightly different in terms of planning and licensing, to be fair, because planning is likely to be more kind of localised. It's going to be immediate. So if someone's, for example, putting planning permission for an extension on their house, then you wouldn't want to consult within a 150-metre radius. However, you might want to consult with the immediate neighbours. So we can certainly have a look at it as an indicator, but I think we need to be kind of very careful how we draw that comparison, because potentially we could be considering an application for a nightclub. And of course, that's going to have a wider impact than obviously than the extension on a building. Just going back to the point about vicinity as well, another point I made within the committee report is that under the Licensing Act, there was a review and it specifically sought to remove the word vicinity from the guidance, because it originally said that interested parties living or working in the vicinity of a premises would be entitled to make an application. But it sought to remove that because it felt that people shouldn't be excluded from making a representation, irrespective of where they live. And the point I made in the report was by putting in the 150-metre consultation, it almost infers that actually we deem this the cut-off point. We deem this the area where those are going to feel the most impact. Those outside, we're less likely to take your representations or carry them with as much weight. So that is also a consideration for the committee.
Thank you. Councillor Neville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think
I agree with a lot of what's already been said. If you've started something and you've had good reasons, as I'm sure the Task and Finish panel had a very good reasons 17 years ago for making that 150 radius and doing actual public consultation by sending out letters, they had a very good reason for doing so. Once you start removing that, you are going to come under accusations of not caring about public opinions. And the idea that we set up a MailChimp is fantastic in one way because it is greener, and I totally get what you're saying, but how do you know you'll want to be be on that MailChimp until something application comes up, and you may not know about it unless you receive a letter through the post, and that's the problem I think we have here. I can see the cost implications. I can see the green implications of continuing to send out letters, but I can also see the problems we have. You know, I think we do make very good decisions. Sometimes, as has been said, we do make changes to conditions to meet some public concern. But we still pass the application. In fact, most applications do get passed in the end, but there are changes made to the conditions. I also think the problem for parish councils are they have less resources than we do. They have the notice boards. I suppose that's one where you could consult, which certainly planning uses notice boards in Buckinghamshire, and I'm sure they do elsewhere, which has a list of the applications for the town in that area, which is always, some people do find out about that, but it is parish newsletters are once a quarter, at least in Buckinghamshire they are, and by which time the statutory time will have passed. So actually using newsletters won't actually, I don't think, be of any value whatsoever. So yes, there is a thought here, and if we do change the radius, what are we saying here? I mean, if you reduce it, then you have the same problem that you have if you take it away altogether. Although perhaps it's not quite as bad, but because some people are still included in the letter writing. So I'm a bit loath to change what we're doing, although I'm being pulled another way for other reasons.
Okay, thank you. We've got two more speakers. First of all, Councillor Louise Mead, and then Councillor Lyon.
And then Councillor Pond again.
Louise?
Yeah, I think actually what I was going to say has been said, but I don't really know what MailChimp is, but I don't think that's going to work because, as Councillor Kesker said, and a lot of us have said, you're excluding quite a lot of not just older people, but people that not everybody uses the internet. Apart from the fact, I think you find a lot of people don't even know what licensing is. They wouldn't have a clue what it was until they got that letter about something that was near to them, something that was going to happen near to them. They wouldn't even know what licensing was. So I don't think they'd be looking up on the council website about licensing, to be honest. So it seems to work well as it is, and I would stick with it as it is. There's nothing like an old-fashioned piece of paper with a letter, all right? It might be wasting a little bit of paper, but I don't think it's very much in the scheme of things.
Thank you. Councillor Lyon.
Thanks, Chairman. In trying to sort of explore the cost element here, the fact that, okay, we're trying to balance the books and make it more reasonable. If we looked at alternative rather than a letter, perhaps a postcard, would that be cheaper rather than having to stuff letters? Could that be something that's considered? The second thought was looking at the radius that is being used. Do we know what on average, what the cost would be, say 50 metres, 100 metres, 150 metres? What are we actually talking about saving here? I mean, we haven't got any information to be able to say, well, if we only went to this distance, this would be a cost. Again, do residents within whatever distance know whether they're going to get consulted or not, and how important is that for 150 metres versus 100 metres? So I think, we do need to consult. I believe that's important. how many we need to consult and how that cost impact is considered, and whether there's alternative means of printing that is going to reduce the cost.
Okay. Is there anything new you want to say, Councillor White?
Well, I mean, just if we've strayed onto the wider issue of reprographics, the aim is to reduce the overall reprographics budget of the council rather than specifically licensing. An awful lot of stuff I get from the council seems to be sent first class when it could be sent second class, and that's an immediate potential saving with agendas and so forth. And even sent in A4 envelopes when it could be sent in A5 envelopes. Sorry, C5 envelopes. So, you know, there are other opportunities for savings that wouldn't impact on the public.
Yeah. Councillor Pond, had you got anything you wanted to bring to us?
No, I was just going to suggest we have a motion and close it. Close the discussion. I think it's gone on long enough.
Yeah, I think we've done a good discussion. We now come to if we want to make any alternative proposals or changes. Anybody want to suggest anything, Councillor Pond?
Well, I was going to say to keep the consultation with the residents within the 150 metres and investigate other matters, but then I got stuck on exactly the other matters.
Okay. Councillor Sartin, turn yours off. Councillor Sartin?
No, I think one of the other matters would be to consult or talk with the planning department and just see what their way of working is when sending out letters.
Mr. King. David?
Yeah, Chair, what I was going to suggest is obviously we can take away some of the points that have been raised today. We can do some more research into it and possibly bring it back to the committee at a later date. Might be a sensible way forward.
Okay. Any other suggestions? If you agree to that? Okay, thank you very much. Now we move on to item 9, the payment licences. This report is just to note the extension of the temporary measures. You'll see from the report that the existing licences do expire in September, end of this month, no, end of last month, and there is an extension until, suggested that we go to until the end of this 2022. David, do you want to add anything to the report?
No, I think that's pretty much summarised it, Chair, just that it's been extended for another year until September 2022. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Whitehouse.
Yeah, thanks for the update. I just wanted to point or highlight paragraph 12. It says no reports from residents or authorities have been received. I mean, probably it should be right if you say have been recorded, because certainly I've passed on from at least one resident a concern they raised about particular premises in Epping, and I got a response from, it might have been community safety, but you know, some officer responded. So just because we haven't got the evidence of no concerns doesn't mean that concerns haven't gone through the council or been expressed. And I'm aware that some of the disability organisations, guide dogs and so forth, have some concerns about the proliferation of street furniture and so on.
Okay. Councillor Sartin.
Thank you. I was just going to ask on number 14 whether or not the final one had now reapplied, and just to say that obviously it has been something that has been successful and has been well accepted within the district.
I think the final one's now in consultation, Councillor, so we'll update you on that, let you know.
Okay, Councillor Lyon.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the whole initiative has been really good. It's certainly improved the sort of viability of street dining where I live in Chigwell, and it's been welcomed by residents and the shopkeepers. However, I know of one particular case where I was called by the licensing officer who was visiting to determine a distance, because there was a distance issue with people accessing the footway because of other street furniture. So there have been some issues associated with it, and I think the consultation work that's gone on with officers has been really good. So I think this is useful to know.
Councillor Kesker.
Thank you, Chairman. But just a very quick one. Do we still, and I don't even know if they're under your control, do we still have the patrol of 3 ex-police personnel going around the streets? 1 man and 2 ladies?
Yes. there's more than one man and two ladies at the moment. But yes, they do. They're doing a range of roles, to be honest, connected with COVID. So they were the ambassadors, sort of reassuring the public on the high streets and encouraging or having getting a flavour for confidence on the high streets, people coming back, for example. They still do that. And they also, you might have seen them around the district doing pop-ups with giving lateral flow tests out to residents. They do leafleting and they support businesses if they have problems with sort of messaging or behaviours of customers and promoting the vaccine as well. And we have to see how things unfold with coronavirus if there's numbers are going to increase through the winter, then I think they'll have a bigger role. But they have been really positively received. We get lots of positive comments from residents and from businesses actually that really like that support.
Yeah, please do.
May I come back just to say, are we paying for that or is the government reimbursing?
We get a fund from the government and with parameters of what we're allowed to use it for. And one of them is marshals and another wider remit actually, and so it comes out of that funding.
Thank you. Okay, any other comments? Okay. So we agree, we note that report, and then we're moving on to item 10, the Taxi and Private Hire Vehicle Standards, National Register of Taxi and Private Hire Licence Revocations and Refusals. Another one, and that is on page 23. You've got the report before us. If you can, David, if you could just summarise the main points of the report. The members hasn't read it, but it's nice to have just a few comments on the report.
I'll keep it very brief, Chair, okay. And I'm sure the committee will appreciate that now. So it pretty much, it's all contained within the report. In July 2020, the government published the statutory taxi and private hire vehicle standards to licensing authorities aimed at safeguarding children and vulnerable adults. The standards set out a range of measures to protect taxi and private hire vehicle passengers and are intended to promote and standardise a consistent approach to taxi licensing across local authorities by requiring councils to publish a single and cohesive policy. The recommendations, Chair, are contained in the report, in the body of the report, so I don't need to go through those. I would also just highlight to the committee that in addition to the taxi and private hire vehicle standards, the Local Government Association has commissioned the National Anti-Fraud Network to develop a national register as a practicable way for licensing authorities to check if the applicant has had a licence revoked or refused elsewhere. Again, that's detailed in the report, the recommendations there, Chair. Similar to the standards, they're not statutory. Whilst they are recommended, it is down to the council to determine whether or not to adopt them. We will be reviewing the taxi licensing policy in its entirety and we'll be bringing it back to the committee with our recommended changes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Comments, members? Who was it first? Sorry, I did. Yes, please do.
Okay, I will. Thank you very much for this. It's pretty straightforward, I think, because obviously you're developing a policy and we haven't got that in front of us yet. I do welcome the register. I think that will be a very, very useful addition to our data that we can access in future. But just a pure question on procedure. You said it's coming back to the licensing committee. Will that be the next one in the spring?
Possibly.
good shot.
Chair, we certainly, because we're also working on other policies as well. I know we're going to talk about the market policy in a short while. So there's a number of policies, and certainly around the taxi policy, I would say this is a particularly detailed piece of work. And obviously, whilst I've alluded to in the report, a lot of these measures are already contained within our policy. We're going to use it as an opportunity to do a wholesale review of the taxi licensing policy, and to make sure that that policy is up to date and fit for purpose. So that will take time. So I'd be loath, Chair, to give you a time scale at this stage, but we would be looking, certainly not if not spring, perhaps summer of next year would be a reasonable time frame.
We'd want to be part of this includes CCTV in taxis that we discussed before, and so we would be wanting to consider that as part of it as well, because that is part of safeguarding. So we would probably be looking at consulting the trade again as well. So that there adds a time element to that. With the register, we'll be doing that anyway. So there's the good news is we're actually part of the National Anti-Fraud Network anyway, with our existing council fraud team. So we're signed up to that. So this is really an administrative process to just sort of tag on to something that we've already signed up to. So that shouldn't be too onerous to do, and we'll put that in place as soon as we can. And the rest of it, I think, as David said, we do actually, our existing policy does cover actually a lot of the stuff. We want to make sure we can do absolutely everything, and we're going to do it properly, so we want to invest proper time into it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lyon.
Thanks, Chairman. Paragraph 21, which talks about CCTV, I know what Sally said about that, but it was a year ago that we actually considered that, if it was November 2020. Is there a time limit? If it's a statutory requirement, is there a time limit when that needs to be enacted by ourselves? And when are we likely to see that report?
There's no statutory, it's not a statutory obligation to do this. The standards, they're standards, but they're not statutory. Yeah, but they're not. But they're not. We have, we'd be, it wouldn't be good practice not to consider them, and that's, we're reasonably confident we do cover off most of the things that are recommended, but it isn't a statutory obligation to commit to all of those. But it's appropriate that we consider all of those options in the overall package of adequately safeguarding the customers, residents, and the business, the taxi drivers themselves. And when you remember, we did do a consult about a year ago. We had very, very little response, and nothing that we could really make any substantive decisions on or measures about, because the response was so little. So we need to find a better way of doing that, really. And that's what we says in the last. It is recognised that we did say that we would come back to you in about a year's time. I think because of coronavirus, not blaming everything on that, but the taxi trade has been impacted so much, it really hasn't been something that they'd want to be considering, whether they want to survive. Don't, because the cost will fall onto them. So it didn't seem appropriate anyway to be looking at this in any detail earlier than now.
Sorry, can I just add to that, Chair, as well? Sorry, Sally. Obviously, we mentioned earlier about sustainable transport as well. So there's further consultation and stuff, so we need to be mindful of that. Yeah. Obviously, they've only just started coming back to work after a long period of absence, so we need to kind of choose our times carefully, obviously, going forward. Thank you.
Okay, so we've considered that, the report, and anything else to add? I think we've covered that fairly well. Thank you very much. So moving on to item 11, to consider whether we continue holding these subcommittee meetings virtually on Zoom or in the council chamber here What was the hybrid going to be? Or hybrid, it says.
Hybrid, Chairman. We can have the committee here live and objectors, or I'm not sure about applicants, but certainly objectors on Zoom talking to us and giving their evidence through Zoom.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, fine. Well, I know Councillor Kesker wanted to have a few words on this matter.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I did give prior advice I was going to say something. You know my views that there is no substitute for a proper actual meeting here in the council offices. I would make some comments again on page 28. There are a number of points being made here about face-to-face meetings. One is we've always had 4 spaces left in the car park somewhere for the 4 panel members, on the basis you can't have the panel members chasing around to find they haven't got a space and they can't park somewhere and they're driving around Epping trying to look for somewhere, and could mean that it could ruin the timing of the whole meeting. I would propose that when I understand you have to book parking spaces, you have to book desks, you have to book telephones for all I know, but that we should insist that 4 spaces are left somewhere here for the 4 panel members. Also, it says here that officers cannot guarantee a second private room. Now, I'm not sure what's meant by a second private room. We normally have a private room in which the panel can retire to consider their decision, and I'm not sure why we need 2 private rooms unless this is considered to be a private room, which I can't see. But again, this is essential. We've got to have somewhere on which officers, not giving us advice on the case, but giving us advice perhaps on the law or on other matters, can be out of the general public, out of the actual meeting, and can give us somewhere that we can hear these before we make our decision. So that, I think, is absolutely essential, that we have, whenever we know the date of a panel, a room is booked. I don't know if the old committee room at the end is still available, the one with all the lovely wooden lockers in that we're not allowed to touch. But, I mean, that was most suitable. Can I just say we did have, as a matter of experience, a licensing panel some little while ago, not that long ago. We had technical problems from start to finish, in spite of what I would say was great ingenuity by officers and considerable effort on their behalf to reconnect things. We had blank screens with sound, we had screens with pictures and no sound, we had people speaking who we couldn't understand because the connection was so bad. It was like amateur night down the pub, to be honest. In fact, amateur night probably went smoother than that meeting. We really struggled, and officers, their ingenuity was very considerable in getting us to hold the meeting at all. It reflected very badly on the council. And what I'm worried about is if we have people sitting where you're sitting now with a barrister on a big fee who thinks that they can challenge what we've done on the basis that we have not carried out our duties properly, it's an open door. It's an absolute open door. And my own view is that we should get back to full meetings as soon as possible. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Hendry.
Booking car parking spaces, I don't know. I don't think we can. What you see out there today is going to be halved. The back car park's going. They're literally, if we're going to have officers in this building and the people downstairs, the CAB in the library, and tenants on the 2nd floor, I can't guarantee car parking space at all, I'm afraid. We're only going to have half of what we got there, if that, at the moment.
And the second room?
Second private room, we can book a second private room if it's available. We used to be able to go into the Chief Exec's office, the members' room, any other available offices. They're not available anymore. There are no more private offices. They're all open spaces. There's very few. I mean, there are 1 or 2 rooms we can possibly book, but I can't. There again, I can't guarantee it because meetings are held in there all the time.
The only other thing we can do, if we're having it in here, like we do with the taxi drivers, is everybody else goes out there except the into the foyer out there, and just keep the committee and the necessary officers in here. If there's not room available, that can be worked. Councillor Whitehouse. Oh, sorry.
I mean, there's a whole conference suite downstairs, and there's a company upstairs, part of whose business is renting meeting rooms. I mean, if the civic offices have been built with too few meeting rooms, you know, we'll have to look at going upstairs or downstairs, I suppose. But I mean, I think we need to remember, you know, this is the council's building, and if the system doesn't allow the council to perform its statutory functions, it's the system that is changing, not the statutory functions which need to fit in with the bureaucracy, if you like. I mean, personally, and you know, picking up on sort of climate issues raised earlier, I mean, those climate-friendly meetings would be Zoom or hybrid meetings. And I'm particularly keen that we do have the option of hybrid meetings, because clearly from a time point of view, an accessibility point of view, it makes it much more accessible for people to dial in to make representations, or for you know, barristers potentially to dial in rather than taking a whole day out to travel to Epping. My experience of the virtual meetings have been pretty good, but I have felt for those applicants who've been reliant on, you know, an iPhone or propped up on a table somewhere, and not, you know, having had the same experience as someone sitting in a private office with a webcam and proper speakers. So I think it is important that applicants have the ability to request or to have an in-person hearing, you know, when that meets their needs, and that the council can insist on an in-person hearing if there's a particular reason to do so. But the for the non-contentious stuff, or the stuff with, you know, barely any representations or everything else, I think Zoom is a very viable and efficient option.
Okay. Councillor Neville. Yeah, so Councillor Neville didn't indicate before. Yeah,
thank you. Yes. Well, my opinion is echoing Councillor Whitehouse. I think, by my experience of the Zoom meetings, they've generally gone well. It is the greener option. We don't have to travel anywhere to it except from one room to another, and that's not doing much in the way of pollution. I do note, however, that there is this mandatory requirement for us to have in-person meetings for taxi drivers, which, considering often in the past, before COVID, we'd have premises licence lumped together with taxi driver licence in one meeting for purely convenience. You know, we don't want too many meetings. That would then mean the whole of that meeting would have to be in public, because you couldn't have one without the other. So I would echo, there are certain circumstances in which, yes, you would have to have a fully public meeting, and those reasons would have to be explained to people, but it makes life easier for people who want to take part in the meeting. I think, generally speaking, okay, there seems to be an exception to the rule, but I've also known meetings which were delayed because councillors weren't here. And sometimes they get delayed because members of the public don't turn up, who were here to make their case. It's happened in the past, so I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sartin.
Thank you, Chairman. There are pros and cons for both 4 and 5. I think Councillor Kesker very clearly stated reasons for being in the office. And as far as the stability of Zoom meetings, we had a hybrid meeting in here last night for overview and scrutiny. At 2 points during the meeting, we had our officers who were coming in on Zoom who froze and lost part of the meeting. It is a problem. We might be as technically advanced as we are, but these things do happen. And as far as Councillor Morgan himself said, we have, on numerous occasions, had meetings where we have asked the applicants and everybody else present to leave the chamber while we stayed in and had our discussions in here, so I don't really see the problem around finding a second space in which for us to speak privately. But if there is necessary, the one room that is still closed and is a private space and will not be used 24/7, so to speak, is the chairman's stroke leader's room. So there are options available around that. Parking is a problem, and certainly it could be the situation where members are having to find somewhere to park before they can get into that. But we have to take that on board when we're coming across 4 meetings and arrange our timescales around that. But I personally feel that with this, particularly the breakdown of Zoom, which does occur, you could have a very important meeting which we then have to reconvene at a later date because we've lost connections. So I would certainly be in favour of coming back into the chamber. And again, as Councillor Neville has said, there are going to be meetings which have to be here if they've got taxi driver applications in with the agenda.
Okay, any other comments from members? David Lassalle, do you want to say anything about this item? You got a very good comprehensive report. Well, I think Adrian sort of partly wrote it, didn't he? Anything else you want to add?
Yes, Chair. I mean, it's a very difficult one. This one. It wasn't my report. You'd be glad to know. We'd be here all night arguing the pros and cons. I can see that there's pros and cons to both. What I would say to the committee is at the moment, obviously this kind of remote hearing has come about because of the pandemic, because of COVID, and that is still a consideration. So I think possibly going forward it should be kept under review, and certainly with a kind of final decision at a later date, because I think you would possibly need to look at, as the saying goes in licensing, each case on its own merits, depending on the size of the hearing and so on, whether it's advisable to have that over Zoom or whether to have it in person. I think personally I prefer in-person meetings. I always have done. I think there's a number of pros to that. Certainly it's good to see applicants and interested parties get together prior to a hearing, because quite often they can have discussions and actually come to an amicable agreement without the council needing to get involved. But I can see that there's pros and cons for both, but I think it's too early to make a decision either way, because we are seeing numbers in terms of COVID on the increase, so I think that's still a factor. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. If there's no other comments, I mean, Councillor Kesker, you made a proposal. Have we a seconder for your proposal that we return to the council chamber? Any other comments? Do you want to vote on it, or can we agree? Councillor Sartin.
Sorry, Chairman, can I just make another comment? Following on from what Mr King has just said, that we are still in a flux situation. Perhaps this is not the point at which we should be making a absolute decision, and that we should park that for the time being if Councillor Kesker is having to do that.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm happy to that. I understand the current situation. I've laid the marker down, but I appreciate things are still in a state of flux. So let's look at it again as soon as possible. When is our next meeting? Not until March next year, which is quite a long time to leave it. But we will have had the whole of the winter by then, and we'll see what the situation is then. Yeah. Okay, I'm prepared to withdraw that.
Councillor Sartin.
Can we come to a sort of halfway point where if officers feel that there is an application coming forward that is perhaps particularly contentious, and one where they feel that it might be more appropriate to be an in-person meeting, for them to make that judgment for when that is coming to an agenda?
Can we do that?
Yep, that sounds fine.
So can we agree that, members, that we, carry on as we are, and then in, right, I think everybody's agreed? Yes. Councillor Whitehouse, you wanted to... Oh, you're right, are you? Right, okay. Right. Well, thank you very much for that. That's got through that. Couple of other things I've got, other matters arising or any other business. Parking arrangements, I think you wanted to say something, Sally, on that, didn't you? Or no?
Well, I think it's pretty much been said.
Yeah,
in
but
the
you're looking
discussions
into it, what we can do, aren't you?
Yes, as far as I know so far, that everything stays is till November, and then it's being reviewed again. And there will be, that there is the booking system, and I don't know how far, because we don't have to book parking spaces actually at the moment, where you have to book desks but not parking spaces, how much you can book in advance. So if you know that you've got need to be attending here, that you get in there quick kind of thing, and just take advantage of that booking as soon as you can. That's all I can add really. I don't know any more.
Yeah, we'll leave that with you. Also, Councillor Alan Lyon, you mentioned about electric taxis. Do you want to add anything to what you've already said?
Chairman, do we have a couple of other points before we get to that, 12 and 13? Have we covered those in the agenda? Review of licensing.
And review current licensing sub.
Oh yes, yeah.
Procedures. Yeah.
I've jumped ahead of it, haven't I? Right. We go back to review of licensing subcommittee procedures. Any procedures you want changed or altered? You all happy with that? If you are at the moment. Review of current future training needs. Only when there's new members really, and I know Councillor Williamson is new to our meeting, but he had training before he started from, I think, Kentucky or something, didn't you?
Thanks, Chair. I was given training by an outside body. I can't remember the name of it. LG.
Oh, right. Okay.
I think, and it was excellent. Really, really useful. But I found it more useful going back over the previous meetings on the webcasts and things, and just seeing how it operated from there. But it's been very interesting. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lyon.
Thanks, Chairman. I did mention before that there's confusion between planning and licensing, and particularly with parish councils. So I don't know whether there's anything we can consider for parish and town councils in terms of some training on licensing, so that they're aware of what the consultation's all about and what they're expected to do.
I'll just say a bit about my own town. I've got 3 parish councils that come under my ward. I know if there's anything to licensing and there's any problems or opposition to it, the town council and parish council soon find out, and they reply accordingly. But yes, it's. I think the planning and consultation is very close to the application. They don't go very far out away from that as normal. But yes, we could see that. I understand what you mean, Councillor. Councillor. Neville.
That's the one. Yes, no, I was just going to add to that. I do believe that the licensing training has in the past been open to town and parish councillors. And I think going forward that needs to continue, because it will be useful for them to actually know what it's all about, because sometimes I sit at the planning committee at the parish and it's clear that they don't know what the reasons you might object to something, possibly. So I think we should do all we can to encourage them as they're part of the consultation process.
Okay. Go to White House.
I mean, the other channel for communicating with town and parish councils is local councils liaison committee, which doesn't rely on people thinking, oh, I need to know something about licensing, I'll turn up to a training session, because they're sort of there already. So that's a potential option.
Okay. Anything else on the actual training needs? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say that now there is much more online training available, which is really useful. Historically, we've had new members and anyone wanting refreshers we've brought in a solicitor, James Button, but he will deliver those courses virtually now, and he'll do bite-sized ones. So I think several members have attended those already on street. There was a number, wasn't yet street trading and Gambling Act, I think, and so I think they will continue in this new world. So that'll be make it more accessible to people. Thank you.
Chair, if I may just come in on that as well, there are some local government association handbooks as well, but most of the training out there is actually aimed at councillors in committee members, at licensing committee, but there are some good training literature out there that we could arrange to circulate possibly to the parish councillors that will give them a good overview of the Licensing Act.
Okay, thank you. Anything else on that item? No? I think we have got to matters arising now. Councillor Lime, had you finished what you were going to say? Got to remember how far we got.
I haven't started yet.
Please continue.
Thank you, Chairman. It was about electric taxis and charging, because we had a very interesting presentation from Stephen Lloyd-Jones and Francesca Edmonds, last night, Overview and Scrutiny, and particularly on the taxi situation. I know Stephen's doing some work, and there's a paragraph in his report which talks about incentives and barriers of electric vehicles, minicabs and taxis. I'm just wondering if there's anything we could be looking at, particularly with the ultra-low emission zone that's coming in over the 406, or on the other side of the 406. So any taxi journeys that are going to be outside Epping Forest into London are going to incur additional costs. Now, if they haven't got electric vehicles, or they're not compliant with Euro 6, then that is obviously going to have an impact on charges and what residents are going to be paying for those taxis. So I think it's something we do need to consider. How we do that, I don't know, but I think Sally was suggesting maybe Stephen should come to the next meeting. But is there anything that we, or Sally can suggest that we need to think about going forward on this one?
Okay.
I mean, just to add that the licensing team have been working reasonably closely with Stephen on taxi licensing, so he'll be doing a consultation to the businesses, and we've got to think about a wider way of communicating with them, really. And also, I mean, one thing is whether we want to, is around looking at it from the customer point of view. Do we want to encourage customers to use electric vehicles, and then it therefore incentivise taxi drivers to convert to electric? But it has to be balanced. It's a cost, and whether we can look at, I don't know, I think we have to be creative about financial incentives to encourage our drivers to convert to electric without it implicating, being a direct cost to the council, because that's not going to happen, I don't think.
Okay.
But I do think it might be worthwhile if people are interested in inviting Stephen to the next meeting, where some members won't have had the opportunity to hear him.
Okay, yes, good, thank you. Right, what was one other thing, and I don't know where it came from, but Councillor Pond, you wanted to talk about street trading, or just mention it? Can you put your...
Yes, just I just wanted an update about the farmers' market in Loughton High Road. It's been going about 15 years. When the time came to renew the licence, it was discovered that the council didn't have a policy on those sort of markets. They had them for the individual stalls. And of course, Epping and Waltham Abbey don't need a licence. But what was happening? Quite hard.
Thank you. So some markets are charter markets, Epping, Ongar, Waltham Abbey. They don't need a licence, or they have the right through charter to operate markets. Historically, this council have used street trading consents to authorise trading, and including the Loughton Farmers Market. When that's been looked at, that's the wrong way of doing it. And this is something actually that many when it's very archaic legislation, and councils across Essex and nationally have applied this legislation in the way that it suits, and people are doing different things and getting away with it, but it isn't the correct way of doing it. So now, when we're looking now at the bigger project of sort of encouraging businesses onto the high street, and rejuvenation of the high street, and the potential for particular markets, for example in Buckhurst Hill, specialist type markets, farmers markets, flower markets, whatever, across the district. We want to sort of regularise it in a proper way. So we're developing a markets policy, and we're sort of in the process of drafting that at the moment, which will frame out high-level parameters for operating markets across the district, where, I mean, you can have a market operator run the market, and he would pay the council a fee for doing that. In theory, you could also have the council directly operating the market itself, and having its own inspectors to do that. Because we're not there yet, we're with the Loughton Farmers Market. When they wanted to start up again, we found a get-around process, so that they could actually continue to operate, but under our existing arrangements of street trading consents. But it would have involved every street trader not applying or giving us the information on their own particular stalls, which they didn't have to do historically. And that led to administrative work for the operator. And at the time they decided that was too onerous, and so they pulled out. So that's why that hasn't gone. It's still available. If the Loughton Farmers Market want to start up tomorrow, we have a process ready for them to do that. And it's not financially burdensome on them. In fact, we're setting the fee at exactly the same price as it would be if they charge for one street trading consent. So in fact, it would be a money earner for them. But at the time when we spoke, I can't remember the councillor who I was talking to, which is terrible, but about this, the representative for the... Pardon? Yes. David Linnell. So he was sort of liaising between us and the operator, but they didn't at the time want to carry on. But they can do it any time. We're ready. We have the process if they want to. And then going forward, it'll be a much streamlined, mechanism.
Okay.
Oh.
How long before you're able to get to do work on that?
The work from our side is pretty much done. Within the next few weeks, we'll be in a position to. We need to get the portfolio holder to look at it, Councillor Patel, and then we will do a consult across a district-wide consult for business and residents, and then we will be in a position to put it forward for approval and adoption. We need to adopt the Food Act. The legislation, the appropriate legislation is the Food Act, 1984.
Okay.
Can I just
add into that it will be going to one of the select committees as well before it finally is taken to Cabinet for their final approval.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, well, thank you for that update. I think that concludes our meeting, unless anybody's got any very important business to discuss. No? Right, our next meeting will be on the 15th of March. So thank you all, the committee, and all our officers for their update and helping us out. And I declare the meeting closed.